I work customs at Sydney International Airport, and last month I watched an American businessman argue with our biosecurity officer about why he should be allowed to bring in beef jerky. Not because he didn't know the rules. He knew. He just disagreed with them. He told our officer that Australian quarantine laws were unnecessary because American beef is USDA certified, which is basically an international pass. Our officer explained that Australia has strict biosecurity to protect our agriculture from foreign diseases. The man pulled out his phone and showed her a Wikipedia article about American food safety standard. He said, "See? Says right here the USDA is world-class. Your rules don't apply to world-class products." She asked if he'd read the declaration card he signed. He said he had, but he thought it was more of a suggestion for regular food. When she explained the beef jerky had to be confiscated or he'd face a $400 fine, he asked to speak to her supervisor. She was the supervisor. He then said, and I quote, "In America we literally invented beef jerky. I think we know if it's safe." He paid the fine. Australian biosecurity has been protecting our ecosystem since 1908. America invented beef jerky in never. Same week, a tourist asked me why her phone showed the wrong time. I explained she'd crossed the international date line. She said that couldn't be right because her phone was brand new. She asked if our airport Wi-Fi was hacking her device. Another guy insisted his connecting flight to Melbourne was delayed because he watched it land on flight radar. The flight had landed in Melbourne, Florida. He'd been tracking the wrong continent for 3 hours. And that was just Tuesday. I was processing arrivals at Brisbane Airport when an American family came through with 8 suitcases. Standard procedure until I noticed fresh fruit in their carry-on during the X-ray scan. I pulled them aside and explained Australia has mandatory biosecurity declarations for all food items. The father interrupted me. He said they declared important food, but apples didn't count because apples are universal. I explained that all fruit must be declared regardless of type. He told me he'd been to 12 countries and nobody cared about apples before. I said Australia has unique agricultural protection requirements. He responded, "Unique is just another word for overcomplicated." His teenage daughter asked why Australia was so paranoid about fruit. I explained we're an island nation protecting against fruit flies and exotic diseases that don't exist here yet. The mother said, "Fruit flies are everywhere. We have them in Ohio." I explained these were different species that could devastate our fruit industry. The father said, "Or you could just use pesticides like normal countries." I confiscated 3 apples, 2 oranges, and a bag of grape. He asked for a receipt so he could claim it on travel insurance. I told him confiscated contraband doesn't qualify for insurance claims. He left a 1-star Google review about communist fruit policies. Working the customs desk at Melbourne Airport, I encountered a woman who refused to use the automated passport gate. Not because she couldn't figure them out. She didn't trust them. She told me automated systems steal biometric data, so she needed a human officer to stamp her passport. I explained the automated gates are the standard process, and we don't stamp American passports for tourist entries anymore. She said that was illegal because international law requires passport stamps as proof of entry. I asked where she'd read that. She said she knew it from traveling to Mexico. I explained different countries have different systems, and Australia switched to electronic logging years ago. She insisted she needed physical proof for her record. I showed her how the system logs everything electronically. She asked if I could print out the electronic record. I explained that defeats the purpose of electronic systems. She said, "So you're telling me Australia has no accountability for who enters the country?" I assured her we have extensive accountability. She demanded to speak to a supervisor about proper documentation procedures. My supervisor explained the same thing. She finally used the automated gate but took a photo of the screen as evidence she was here. The screen was displaying an error message because she'd walked through before it finished processing. I was stationed at the agricultural declaration checkpoint when an American man confidently walked past the inspection area with a full cooler bag. I called him back and asked what was in the cooler. He said, "Just lunch from the plane." I asked if he'd declared any food items on his incoming passenger card. He said no because airplane food doesn't count as bringing food in. I opened the cooler to find 2 sandwiches, a bag of chips, an apple, and a small container of honey. I explained all of this needed to be declared. He said the flight attendant gave it to him, so it wasn't his responsibility to declare it. I explained that regardless of where food comes from, passengers must declare it. He argued that food in transit operates under different rules. I asked where he learned that. He said he assumed it because international waters and all that. I explained he was no longer in international territory and Australian biosecurity law applied the moment he landed. He said, "But I didn't buy this in Australia, so Australian law shouldn't apply yet." I confiscated the honey because of bee disease concerns and the apple for fruit fly risk. He asked if he could eat them right there instead of wasting them. I explained that would be consuming confiscated biosecurity items, which isn't permitted. He said, "This is exactly why Americans think Australia is upside down backwards. Australia's biosecurity system has prevented over 40 major agricultural disasters in the past 20 years. At Sydney Airport's immigration area, I watched an American couple argue with our officer about their visa. They'd applied for the wrong visa type. They had tourist visas but said they were planning to do some consulting work while visiting friends in Perth. The officer explained that any work, even unpaid consulting, requires a work visa. The husbands said they weren't getting paid so it didn't count as work. The officer explained Australian immigration law defines work as any productive activity, regardless of payment. The wife said, "In America, if you're not getting paid, it's volunteering." The officer said this wasn't America. The husband responded, "Obviously, or your laws would make sense." He explained they were just helping a friend start up with advice and strategy, which he insisted was basically just talking. The officer asked if this advice would benefit the business. He said of course it would. She explained that made it work under Australian law. He said, "So you're telling me I can't have conversations about business?" She said he could have conversations but not provide professional consulting services. He asked what the difference was. She explained consulting implies expertise being offered in a professional capacity. He said, "I'm not a consultant. I'm a strategy director. Totally different." His wife suggested they just not mention the consulting. The officer reminded them that providing false information to immigration was a serious offense. They had to fly back to the US and reapply for the correct visa. Cost them about $3,000 in flights and visa fees. I was working the currency exchange desk at Cairns Airport when an American tourist tried to pay for his exchange fee in US dollars, which is normal. What wasn't normal was him insisting the fee was wrong because he calculated it in pounds. I explained we use Australian dollars in Australia. He said he knew that, but he converted his US dollars to pounds first to check the rate, and our fee was higher than what he calculated. I asked why he converted to pounds when he was in Australia. He said pounds are the baseline currency for international exchange. I explained that wasn't how currency exchange works. He showed me his phone calculator with a series of conversions going from USD to GBP to AUD. I explained he should just convert directly from USD to AUD. He said, "That's not how you check if you're getting ripped off though." I showed him the official exchange rate posted on our board. He said exchange rates are manipulated by airports, so he uses the pound as a neutral reference point. I asked why he thought British pounds were more neutral than direct exchange rates. He said because England invented currency exchange. I explained paper currency and exchange systems existed long before England. He said, yeah, but they invented the modern version. I processed his exchange at the standard rate. He asked for a receipt showing the breakdown via pound. I explained we don't provide multi-currency conversion receipt. He left saying he'd report us to international exchange standards. No such organization exists for airport currency exchanges. Working at the Qantas check-in counter in Adelaide, an American woman asked why her luggage was overweight when she specifically kept it under 50 pounds. I explained our weight limit was 23 kilograms. She said 50 pounds is 23 kilograms. I said 50 pounds is actually about 22.7 kilograms. She insisted she'd checked multiple conversion websites, and they all said 50 pounds equals 23 kilograms. I pulled up a conversion calculator and showed her that 23 kilograms equals 50.7 pounds. She said the website must be wrong because she'd been using 50 equals 23 her whole life. I explained she'd been using a rounded approximation. She said, rounding doesn't matter when the numbers are that close. I explained that when you're right at the weight limit, 0.7 pounds matters. She asked why we couldn't just round in her favor. I explained weight limits aren't negotiable. She insisted her bag was exactly 50 pounds, so it should be fine. I weighed it again. It was 53 pounds, which is 24 kilograms. She said the scale must be wrong because she weighed it at home. I explained airport scales are calibrated regularly and certified. She asked if she could pay the overage fee in pounds instead of kilograms. I had no idea what that meant. She explained that if we charged by the kilogram, she should be able to pay in pounds since she packed in pounds. I explained the fee was in Australian dollars, not weight unit. She paid the $45 overage fee and muttered about metric system scams. I work at the Jetstar gates in Hobart, and an American passenger asked me why his flight was delayed when the weather was perfectly fine. I explained we had strong crosswinds exceeding safe landing limit. He said he'd checked the weather app and it showed 20 miles per hour winds, which wasn't that bad. I explained our wind restriction was 40 kilometers per hour. He said, 20 miles is definitely less than 40 kilometers, so the flight should go. I explained 20 miles per hour equals 32 kilometers per hour, which was below our limit, but the current winds were measuring 45 kilometers per hour, which equals 28 miles per hour. He stared at his phone and said that didn't make sense because his app showed 20. I explained his app might be showing a different location or delayed data. He said he'd set it to Hobart. I asked if he'd set it to Hobart, Tasmania or Hobart, Indiana. He checked. Hobart, Indiana. He said, well, that's a design flaw. They should specify which Hobart. I explained most weather apps do specify when you zoom in. He said he shouldn't have to zoom in. He then asked why Australia couldn't just use miles per hour like normal countries. I explained most countries use kilometers. He said, most countries are also wrong about a lot of things. The flight was delayed 90 minutes. He spent the entire time recalculating wind speeds and trying to prove our meteorologists wrong. At Perth Airport's rental car counter, an American man insisted we'd given him a broken speedometer. I asked what was wrong with it. He said it only went up to 200 when it should go to at least 120. I explained it went up to 200 kilometers per hour, which was about 124 miles per hour. He said that couldn't be right because speedometers show the speed you're driving. I explained Australian speedometers display kilometers per hour. He said he'd rented cars in other countries and they always had miles per hour. I explained he'd probably rented in countries that use miles. He insisted every country he'd visited used miles. I asked which countries. He listed Mexico, Canada, and the Bahamas. I explained all 3 of those countries officially use kilometers. He said the speedometers definitely showed miles. I suggested he might have been looking at the smaller inner ring that some speedometers include for tourists. He said that didn't sound right. I showed him the car's digital display where he could switch between kilometers and miles. He said, "Why would you need to switch if Australia uses miles?" I explained again that Australia uses kilometers. He asked if the speed limit signs were also in kilometers. I confirmed they were. He asked how he was supposed to know how fast he was going. I suggested driving at the posted speed limit. He rented the car but called an hour later saying he got pulled over for going 80 in a 60 zone. He thought the 60 sign meant 60 miles per hour. It meant 60 kilometers per hour. He was going 50 miles per hour in a 37 mile per hour zone. I was working the biosecurity checkpoint at Darwin Airport during peak tourist season when an American man approached with a suitcase that our scanner flagged for organic material. I asked if he declared any plant or animal product. He said no. I opened the suitcase and found an entire taxidermied crocodile head. Not a small one. A full-sized saltwater croc skull with teeth and dried skin. I asked what this was. He said it was a souvenir from Florida. I explained he couldn't bring taxidermied animal parts into Australia without proper permits and quarantine documentation. He said it was from America, so it should be fine because we're allies. I explained that being allies had nothing to do with biosecurity regulations. He insisted Florida crocodiles and Australian crocodiles were basically the same thing, so there was no disease risk. I explained that American alligators and crocodiles carried different parasites and bacteria than Australian species. He corrected me and said he had a crocodile, not an alligator. I explained Florida crocodiles are still American species with different biology. He said biology was biology. I told him the item had to be confiscated and destroyed. He said it cost him $400 at a Florida gift shop. I explained that didn't change biosecurity law. He asked if he could get a refund from the Australian government since we were confiscating his property. I explained we don't refund items that violate import law. He said, in America, if the government takes your property, they have to pay fair market value. I explained that was about eminent domain, not biosecurity violations. He asked to speak to someone who understood constitutional law. I explained Australian biosecurity law wasn't related to the U.S. Constitution. He demanded to call the American embassy. I provided him with the number. He called. They told him the same thing I did. He asked if he could at least take a photo with it before we confiscated it. I allowed that. He posted it on social media with the caption, "Australia won't let me bring my freedom croc home." The crocodile head was incinerated according to protocol. We find about 1,500 prohibited animal products per month at Australian airports. Working in customs isn't about catching criminals or stopping smugglers most days. It's about explaining to confident people that their assumptions about how the world works aren't universal. Australia's biosecurity laws exist because we're an isolated ecosystem with agriculture worth billions. But every week, someone tries to explain why the rules shouldn't apply to them specifically. And somewhere right now, an American is confidently telling a Sydney customs officer that quarantine laws are just suggestions, while their confiscated beef jerky gets incinerated in a biohazard facility designed specifically for this purpose.